If cats disappeared in the world. Tuesday, if every cell phone on Earth disappeared. My roommate is a cat. You remember Soseki Natsume's famous novel, Yours Truly is a Cat, right? Well, I had something like that, but not quite. My cat's name is Cabbage. But before him, we had a very different cat in our house, and his name was Lettuce. I was 5 years old when my mother found an abandoned kitten and brought it home. It was pouring rain that day, and the kitten had been left in a cardboard box by the roadside. My mom discovered it on her way home from the supermarket. The poor thing was soaking wet. The box had Nagano lettuce printed on the side. So after Mom brought the kitten home and dried him with a towel, she announced, "This little boy's name is Lettuce." It was very strange. My mother had never been much of an animal lover. It took her a while to learn to pet Lettuce, and she was a little awkward at first. So at first I helped her groom the cat until she got used to him. To top it all off, it turned out that my mom was allergic to cats. She was sneezing non-stop. For an entire month, she was constantly shedding tears and sniffling her nose, but she never even had the thought of giving up the cat. "I can't let him go, he chose me." She kept blotting her flushed, swollen face and continued to nurse the cat. One day, about a month later, Mom's cat allergy suddenly disappeared. It was some kind of miracle, or maybe her body had adapted to the irritant. Either way, one day all of Mom's symptoms, sneezing, crying, and runny nose, disappeared. I remember that day vividly. Lettuce never left her side for a minute and was constantly pawing at her feet. To gain something, you have to lose something. Mom used to say it was the truth. People are always trying to get something for nothing. But that's stealing. If you get something, it means someone somewhere lost something. Even happiness is built on someone else's misfortune. My mom used to tell me that a lot. She thought it was one of the laws of the universe. Lettuce lived 11 years. He developed a tumor and lost a lot of weight. Toward the end, he slept all the time and died in his sleep. The day after he left, my mom dropped everything. She had always been cheerful and liked to cook and clean. But now she had lost all interest. She sat at home and cried. So I would do the laundry and then take my mom to lunch at the local Chinese restaurant. Over time, I think we tried every dish on the menu. About a month went by, and one day Mom came home with another kitten she had found, as if this was a daily occurrence. The kitten looked a lot like Lettuce. A round black and white ball with a dash of gray. A beautiful cat. He resembled Lettuce so much that we decided to name him Cabbage. After watching him curled up in a ball, Mom laughed and said, "He really does look a lot like Lettuce." For the first time in a whole month, she smiled. I even cried when I saw her laughing again. Or maybe just a little tear. I worried that Mom might fade away, disappear somewhere far away and never come back. And 4 years later, she did indeed leave us. "What a coincidence, I have the same thing as Latuke," Mom said, laughing sadly. And just like Latuke, Mom was losing weight. One day she went to bed and never woke up again. She went quietly into the next world. "Take care of Cabbage," she asked me shortly before she died. Fate seems to have a sense of humor. I would die before Cabbage, just like my mother. I'm sure she'd be far from thrilled with me. I can still hear her saying she should have left Cabbage to someone else. The next thing I knew, it was morning. For the first time in a long time, I dreamed about my mom. Cabbage was meowing next to me. I pulled him close to me and squeezed the soft ball of fur tightly. His silky, fluffy and warm body filled with life. I remembered, I had an extra day of life. I began to reconstruct in my memory the events of the previous day. Perhaps it had all been real, but on the other hand, it could have been a dream. Except that I couldn't find my cell phone anywhere, which I usually leave on my bedside table. And the chills that had been bothering me for a long time were gone, along with the headache. Maybe that meant my deal with the devil was real? All the cell phones were gone. When you think about it, you realize it's not such a bad thing, especially when it comes to cell phones. Not so long ago, it seemed like I wasn't parting with the damn phone from morning to night, all the way to bed. I stopped reading books and browsing newspapers like I used to. The movie discs I used to buy were lying in a pile on the floor of my room, unviewed. On the tram, on the way to work, I couldn't take my eyes off my phone. Even while watching movies, I was constantly checking my mobile. During my lunch break, I had a terrible urgent need to look at my phone. Instead of playing with the cat, I focused all my attention only on my mobile. I began to hate myself for becoming a slave to this thing. People are constantly trying to get something for nothing. But that's stealing. If you got something, it means that someone, somewhere, lost something. Mobile phones appeared in our lives only about 20 years ago, but in such a short time they managed to establish complete control over us. In just 20 years, our lives began to be controlled by something that we really don't need, making us believe that we cannot do without it. When people invented the mobile phone, they also created a feeling of anxiety if it is temporarily unavailable to us. But who knows, maybe we experienced something similar to those people who first started sending letters. Same with the internet. Throughout human history, we have created new things only to lose the old ones. If you look at it that way, it makes you think that maybe God had an idea when he accepted the devil's offer. I suppose you are wondering who I made my last call to. It's certainly personal, but, okay, I'll share it with you. She was my first love. My first girlfriend. Just don't call me a sentimental fool. They say that when a person dies, the first name that comes to mind is his first love. And in this, I think, I am like the most ordinary person, basking in the morning sun. I took my time getting out of bed. I listened to the radio while I made myself breakfast. I made coffee, fried one egg, and tossed a slice of bread in the toaster. Then I sliced a tomato and put it on a plate. After breakfast, I drank another cup of coffee and leisurely read a book. Ah, life without a phone. How wonderful. Time seemed to suddenly lengthen, and space expanded, stretched out. It was approaching noon. I slammed the book shut and went to the bathroom. I took a relaxing hot shower, put on my clothes, in the usual black and white colors, that lay neatly folded nearby. And then I headed to meet her. The first thing I did after leaving the apartment was visit the hairdresser, my usual route. I knew it was absurd to waste time on a haircut when you were going to die, but I wanted to impress my ex-girlfriend, so don't laugh at me. After fixing my hair, I popped into the optician across the street to get new glasses and walked to the tram stop. Just as I got there, a tram pulled up to the stop and I hopped on one of its green carriages. It was the middle of the workday, but there wasn't a single empty seat in the carriage. Usually, all the passengers were studying their mobile phones. But today, everything was different. People were reading books, listening to music, or looking out the windows at the passing landscape. They seemed to have no problem finding something to do with their free time. Their facial expressions were quite animated. Why do people look so serious when they look at their phones? It was so peaceful on the tram without all these fancy gadgets. So not only did I gain an extra day of life for myself, but I also seemed to have done the world a big favor. But had all the phones really disappeared from the face of the earth? I looked out of the tram window, looking at the sign of the noodle shop on the corner of the shopping district. This is where Kapusta goes secretly at night to buy mackerel scraps. The sign of the noodle shop, as usual, had its phone number listed. Mobile phones have only appeared in our lives for about 20 years, but in such a short time they have managed to establish complete control over us. I looked around and noticed that inside the tram there were still posters advertising mobile phones. But no one on the tram had a mobile phone in their hands. What does all this mean? And then I remembered. I had seen something similar in a collection of comics that I liked to leaf through as a child. Doraemon, Tentumushi Comic Collection, Volume 4. This is where one of Doraemon's magical items, his invisibility cap, appears. If all the cats in the world disappeared. The story goes like this. Nobita Nobi, the boy, the main character of this series, was scolded by his parents as usual. And Nobita goes to the cat Doraemon for comfort, complaining to him, "It's not necessary for them to keep a close eye on me all the time. I want to be left alone." And then Doraemon takes out the invisibility cap from his four-dimensional pocket. Doraemon explains, "When you wear this cap, you become like a stone on the road, invisible. In other words, you continue to exist, but no one notices you." Nobita puts on the hat with great joy. For a while, he enjoys being left alone. But then he gets lonely. And when he tries to take the hat off, he can't. It's stuck to his head, and he starts crying. His tears cause the hat to slide off, and then Mom and Dad notice him again. Nobita is happy that people care about him again. That's where the story ends. If all the cats in the world disappear. Well, I'm getting a little off topic. Back to what I was saying, I think the Aloha system probably worked in a similar way to Doraemon's invisibility cloak. In other words, phones didn't disappear. Everyone just stopped noticing them. People went into a collective trance. The devil was actually playing Doraemon. Over time, phones will gradually go out of use entirely. Like stones by the side of the road, they will be ignored until they are gone. If you think about it, the 107 people who had Aloha before me probably made some things disappear. But the thing is, No one else noticed. It would be like the things you use in your everyday life, like your favorite coffee mug or your new socks, suddenly disappearing without you even noticing. And if you did, no matter how hard you looked, you wouldn't be able to find them. As far as I know, there are plenty of things that have already disappeared without us even noticing, things we thought would always be there. The green tram climbed 2 hills and finally reached the stop where I got off. It was in a large square. I walked to the meeting place. In the center of the square was a clock tower. When we were in college, we used to arrange dates there. There was a traffic circle around the tower, and scattered around were numerous restaurants, bookstores, and various small shops selling all sorts of things. I arrived 15 minutes early. Usually I check my phone while waiting, but now I took a small paperback book out of my pocket and began to read, waiting for her to arrive. The meeting time came, but she didn't show. Then another half hour passed, and she didn't show. Damn. Without thinking, I put my hand in my pocket, looking for my phone. It's not there. All the phones were gone. Maybe I got the meeting place wrong? Or the meeting time? I started to get angry. All the information I needed was on the phone I used when I made a deal with the devil. It was quite possible that I had misunderstood the meeting time. Damn. What nonsense. I muttered out loud. I was supposed to feel freer without my phone, but as it turned out, I needed it anyway. And there was nothing I could do. I just stood there under the clock tower, shaking. I must admit, when I used to date her in college, I often muttered to myself at moments like this. She had come to our town to go to the local college. She majored in philosophy. I remember the house where she lived all alone, her electric hairdryer and a small heater. And books. She had a lot of books. Even in those days, everyone had a mobile phone. That was how we communicated with each other, how we talked, everyone except her. The house where she rented a room didn't even have a landline. She always called me from a payphone. Every time I saw the word payphone flash on my phone display, I went crazy with happiness. I always responded instantly and talked to her, no matter where I was, in class or at my part-time job. But the most unpleasant moment was missing her call. And then I helplessly looked at the history of incoming calls. After all, I couldn't call her back. Sometimes I even had nightmares about empty phone booths, where the phone was constantly ringing and no one answered. So I started sleeping with the phone in my hands, clutching it tightly to me so as not to miss her call. The phone would warm me up, bringing back memories of her. And then I would always fall asleep soundly. After about 6 months of dating, I finally convinced her to install a landline phone in her apartment. And then she hung up one of those vintage, classic black rotary phones. I got it for free. She bragged to me, demonstrating the process of dialing the number. I called her at home so often that the phone number was simply imprinted in my brain. It was as if it had become a part of me. It's pretty weird. Of all the numbers stored in my cell phone, I could never remember a single one. I can't list the phone numbers of my close friends or colleagues, or even my parents. I handed over all the work of memory and my connection with other people to my cell phone. I no longer had to strain myself to remember things. It's hard to imagine what cell phones have done to the human brain. Something quite frightening. Yesterday, sitting on the stairs, I tried to recall any number that was firmly imprinted in my memory. And naturally, it was her number that came to mind. I guess I instinctively relied on my own memory. It's been 7 years since we broke up. But I still wanted to ask her something. She answered my call. I couldn't believe that she still had the same number. She worked at a movie theater, and the next day was supposed to be her day off. I thanked God for this lucky coincidence and arranged to meet her. Okay, see you tomorrow. Her voice hadn't changed at all. I felt like I was back in time, back in college. I waited under the tower for an hour until my feet were so cold that they felt like they had grown into the pavement. And then she suddenly appeared, heading my way. She hadn't changed at all. Her style of dress, her walk. Everything was the same. The only thing was that she had cut her long shoulder-length hair and now wore it short. She noticed how pale my face had become and seemed worried. It's hard to imagine what cell phones have done to the human brain. Something quite frightening. What happened? Are you okay? I was a little disappointed by the question of whether I was okay, said instead of a phrase like how are you? Or long time no see. After all, we hadn't talked for ages. We chatted for a while and it turned out that I had arrived a whole hour early. When I said, "Damn. What nonsense," she was surprised. Why? I'm going to die soon. And I told her about my situation, sitting in a nearby cafe. She was silent for a moment, slowly sipping her hot chocolate. Then she looked at me. Are you sure about that? That took me by surprise. Her reaction seemed a little flippant, to say the least. I could imagine 3 possible reactions. In order of preference, they were: how? What happened? Can I help you? Just tell me. I'll do anything. She was silent for a moment, then began to cry. Her reaction left much to be desired. On the other hand, if I recall, even I acted impassively when they told me I didn't have long to live. The whole situation seemed completely absurd even to me. So why am I surprised that other people don't seem shocked, upset, or sad? I don't understand why people always expect others to do what they themselves won't or can't do. Did I want her to be upset? But who told you that? I just found out. It's cancer. Oh, that's terrible. But you don't seem at all lost. I suppose people are surprisingly reserved when they hear they might die soon? Of course, I couldn't tell her that the devil was helping me delay my passing. I don't think anyone wants their first love to think they're mad with grief. And besides, I came to talk to her about something else entirely. And so? What? Since I might die soon, I need to know a few things about myself. You know. To clarify certain things. Really? I mean, I want to find out if my life has had any meaning. Yes, I know you're wondering that. Well, yes. And I'd like to talk to you about us. About our relationship. I've saved so many different memories. But I would like to hear what you remember, even if it's just small details. I realized that I was speaking, perhaps, incoherently, too quickly, and suddenly I realized that the coffee had already cooled down, and I drank it in one gulp. It seemed that my question did not delight her. Well, if you wanted to talk about it, you should have warned me in advance. She fell silent and thought. I suddenly felt all the awkwardness of the situation. Then I went to the toilet and stayed there for some time, slowly returning to the table. That's what I do remember. What? You went to the toilet all the time. That's the first thing she said. And you always spent quite a lot of time there. For a man. What? Is that how it is? Without any preludes, straight to the point. And besides, she had never told me about this before. But now that I heard her remark, I agreed that I did go to the toilet very often and spent quite a lot of time there, probably because I was thinking about different things, so much so that sometimes I even switched off. And then I washed my hands for a long time. It seemed to me as if she hardly went to the toilet. And every time we used public toilets at the same time, she usually came out first and waited for me. And you always sighed a lot. I even thought how hard life must be for you. Well, that's true. And you always drank very little. You couldn't finish your drink. Oh, God, I'm sorry. And by the way, when we went to a restaurant, you could never decide what to order. Even though you're a man. And in the end, you always chose the same thing, curry rice. And when I was angry with you, you were offended every time, and for quite a long time. Having told me all this, she continued to drink her chocolate, quite pleased with herself. Wow. So this is what I have to listen to at the end of my life? Did my life have any meaning? Was it worth it? It all seemed rather presumptuous. So this is what you remember about the person you once loved? Or maybe there is nothing strange about it. Women are always unsentimental and merciless towards their exes. That's how it should be. At least, that's how I reassured myself. And one more thing. Every time you called me, you talked a lot, but when we met, like now, you had almost nothing to say to me. I must admit that she was probably right about that. In those days, we talked on the phone for 2 or 3 hours at a time. And we lived only 30 minutes away from each other. Sometimes our phone conversations would last 8 hours, and then we would laugh that it would be better if we spent the whole day together. But when we actually spent all the time together, for some reason we had nothing to talk about. Talking on the phone seemed more intimate, and even though we weren't in a close relationship at the time, we would enthusiastically discuss even the most intimate issues, but I still considered her opinion of me to be partly negative. Now that the end is near, didn't I deserve something more? I tried to hold on despite the pain she caused me. But you stayed with me for over 3 years, and now you're telling me all this. Yes, that's right. But... what? I liked your phone calls. You talked so emotionally about music and novels. It felt like the world had suddenly changed. I liked you. Maybe I loved you. Even though you had nothing to say to me in person. You know, you're right. Conversations on the phone. I felt the same way. I remember you talking about movies and how the whole world seemed to change just from the sound of your voice. We seemed to have broken the ice, and then we wandered carefree around the city, not noticing the time. We reminisced about old times and the people we knew then, like the skinny kid who had now turned into an incredibly fat man, or that ugly girl with a very strict disposition, but who got married right after graduating from college and now has 4 children. Before we knew it, it was dark, and I walked her home. She lived in a small room right above the movie theater where she worked. "So you did it after all, you married the movie theater." She laughed at this joke. Well, you shouldn't joke about that." "And how is your father?" she asked me as we walked down a cobbled street. I don't think I can answer that." "You never made up?" "I haven't seen him since my mother died." "Your mother always said she wanted you two to get along." "I guess we didn't live up to her expectations." After about 6 months of dating, I took her to meet my parents. My father didn't even come out of his workshop to say hello, and my mother became really attached to her. My mother fed us pie, then cooked us a hot meal, and then treated us to another pie. She just didn't want to let her go home. "I always dreamed of having a daughter," my mother confessed to her. My mother only had brothers, no sisters. And even lettuce and cabbage were male. After that meeting, he and my mother often went for walks together, without even telling me about it. "Your mother was an extraordinary person," she said with a smile. "What do you mean?" "When the new restaurant opened, she was so happy and invited me there. She taught me how to cook. We even went to a beauty salon together." "What? You two went to a beauty salon together? I didn't even know about that." "My mom died 3 years after we broke up, but my girlfriend still came to her funeral. She was weak on her feet, crying and holding Cabbage close until the ceremony was over. I think she sensed how confused and sad Cabbage was, as he wandered aimlessly back and forth around the house. After we broke up, my mom always told me, that girl was a good catch. And every time my mom and I met, she would always say that. After seeing my ex holding Cabbage at the funeral, I finally understood what my mom meant. "How's Cabbage?" "Feeling great." "What are you going to do with him? Who will take care of him when you die?" "I'm thinking about it. I'll find someone." "Well, let me know if you don't find anyone." "Thanks." If all the cats in the world disappeared. At the bottom of the steep hill we had come down, I noticed a glowing movie theater sign. It had been years since I had last visited this place, and now it seemed surprisingly small. I had first seen it as a student, but it had left an unforgettable impression on me. The same with the clock tower in the square. This area hadn't changed much. A real estate office, restaurants, a prep school, and a flower shop. The only thing was that the local supermarket had closed. But now the city I knew had become a miniature version of itself, as if it had shrunk in size. Or was it just me starting to see things differently? "You know, there's something else I'd like to ask you," I trailed off. "What? Why do you think we broke up? Why did you suddenly want to know?" "I think there must have been a special reason, but I can't remember what it was right now." Actually, I was going to ask her this question from the very beginning. Why did we break up? Maybe we got bored with each other, or maybe our feelings cooled, but I couldn't remember what it was that finally broke us up. "So you remember?" She was silent for a while, and then, turning to me abruptly, she fired off a series of questions. "Okay, what's my favorite food?" What an unexpected question. The seconds flew by. Let me think. Deep-fried shrimp? Wrong. Corn tempura. Hey, but I was close. Both are fried. But wait a minute, what is she getting at? Okay, my favorite animal? What? Let's think about it. Japanese macaque. Right. Next, my favorite drink? What's the matter? I didn't remember anything at all. Sorry. I give up. Hot chocolate. What I drank at the cafe today. Have you forgotten already? What can I say? Now I remember. She loved corn tempura and always ordered it during corn season. She often said that it was her favorite dish. And when we went to the zoo, she never went far from the monkey enclosure. And she drank hot chocolate all the time, even in the summer. It's not that I completely forgot about it. I just couldn't remember it at the right moment. Apparently, after we broke up, I just hid all my memories of her deep inside. I heard a phrase somewhere that people forget in order to accumulate memories. In order to move on, you have to forget. But on the other hand, now, in the face of death, I suddenly found myself remembering a lot of trivial things. Maybe people just forget things. I kind of expected that. Same thing with our breakup. Same thing. No point in trying to remember all the details. There's so much heartlessness and cruelty in the world, but there's so much kindness too, so, that's how it was. Right? Well, if you really want to know, I'd say the trip we took the night before college graduation was the beginning of the end. You mean Buenos Aires? Wow, I'm starting to remember. All of our meetings took place within the confines of this small town. We never went far, to the suburbs. We usually ran around the city in circles, like we were playing an endless game of Monopoly. But we were never bored. After classes, we'd meet at the library and go to a movie. Then we'd go to our favorite cafe and chat. Later, we started going to her place and having sex. Every now and then, she'd cook us lunch, and we'd take the funicular up to the observation deck, where there was a stunning view of the city, and have a picnic there. Nothing special, but we were happy. When I think back on it now, it's hard to believe, but it felt like our city, ours alone. If all the cats in the world disappeared. We dated for over 3 years, but we only went abroad once. Argentina. Buenos Aires. It was both our first and last trip together. At the time, we were both obsessed with a movie directed by a Hong Kong filmmaker set in Buenos Aires. So for our last long student vacation, we chose this city. We booked cheap tickets on an American airline with a stopover. We were freezing the whole time on the way, and the food was terrible. 26 hours later, we finally arrived in Buenos Aires. At Ezeiza International Airport, we took a shabby taxi to El Centro. After checking into the hotel, we went straight to our room to sleep. But we couldn't sleep. Even though we were tired, our internal clocks were set to Japanese time. We were on the other side of the world, and in a different hemisphere. And then we decided to go out for a walk and explore the city. The beautiful sounds of the bandoneon echoed through the streets, dancers performed tango right on the cobblestones. While we were exploring the surroundings, clouds hung over Buenos Aires, the sky became lower. We went to the famous Recoleta cemetery and wandered through its labyrinths until we accidentally saw the grave of Eva Perón. Then we had lunch in a cafe, listening to tango melodies played by an elderly gray-haired guitarist. And then we got on a bus going to La Poca, an old working-class district known for its colorful houses, street musicians and other attractions. The trip took half an hour, as the bus meandered through narrow streets for a long time. Finally we saw the wooden houses, painted sky blue and mustard yellow, emerald green and salmon pink, glowing in the rays of the setting sun, like toy houses. When night fell, we went to see a tango show at La Ventana in San Telmo. And the passionate dancing transported us to another world. We spent a couple of days walking around the city, slightly intoxicated by the passion that was in the air. And soon we met Tom, who was staying in the same cheap hotel as us. He called himself Tom, but in fact he was Japanese. A young man of 29, he quit his job at a media company to travel the world. In the evenings we went with him to the local supermarket for wine, meat and cheese, brought our purchases to the hotel and sat in the dining room. Every night we sat there until late, eating, drinking wine and chatting. Tom shared his impressions of his travels with us, about sacred cows in India, about little boys, Buddhist monks in Tibet, about the Blue Mosque in Istanbul and the White Nights in Helsinki. He told us about the endlessness of the ocean that he saw in Portugal. Tom did not limit himself in Argentine red wine and quickly got drunk. But, even completely drunk, he did not stop his story. There is so much heartlessness and cruelty in the world, but no less kindness. For us, after that life in a small town, when you do the same thing day after day, all this was new and exciting. It was impossible to imagine everything that he described. But Tom, without hiding, dedicated us to his stories, sometimes laughing, and sometimes with tears in his eyes. And so the three of us sat, on the other side of the world, having long conversations. The time to return to Japan crept up on us, but Tom suddenly disappeared. He didn't show up at the hotel at the end of the day, after a walk around the city, as he usually did. We drank wine and waited for him, as usual, but he never showed up. The next day we learned that Tom had died. He had gone on a tour to the border between Argentina and Chile to see the world-famous statue of Christ, and the bus he was riding on missed a turn. It was like a dream. We couldn't believe it. I could just see Tom walking into the dining room with a bottle of wine and exclaiming, "Well, it's time for a drink." But Tom never came back. We were in a state of shock all day. On our last day of travel, we visited the Iguazu Falls. 30 minutes by bus, then 2 hours of walking, and in front of us was the largest of the Iguazu Falls, which the locals call the Devil's Throat. We first heard about it from a Hong Kong film and were immediately eager to see it for ourselves. The water falling with such unimaginable force. The magnificence of the place, its scale, all of it gave me a feeling of the absolute fury of which nature is capable. And then I noticed that my girlfriend was in tears. She was crying uncontrollably. But her voice was lost in the deafening roar of the waterfall. That was when the feeling of loss hit me for the first time. A real, tangible feeling of losing someone to whom you had grown very attached. Tom was gone forever. He was dead. We would never see him again. No more late-night conversations over glasses of red wine and pleasant dinners together. For the first time, each of us clearly understood the reality of death. And then she began to sob, there, near the waterfalls, where it was so obvious how powerless and frankly helpless human beings are. She was crying and I couldn't help her. I didn't know what to do. I could only stand there, motionless, by the white, foaming water that roared and disappeared, swallowed by a huge hole in the ground. We left Buenos Aires and returned to Japan by the same route. And again, the trip lasted forever. We didn't say a word to each other during the entire 26-hour flight. Perhaps we had talked enough during our stay in Buenos Aires? No, nothing like that. We simply couldn't find the words. It's not that we had nothing to say. We sat next to each other, but we couldn't share our pain with each other, we froze in silence. Each of us experienced the loss of a friend alone, silently alone. And after sitting there in silence for 26 hours, I think we both realized that this was the end. I mean us. I heard a phrase somewhere that people forget in order to make memories. In order to move on, you have to forget. How strange. We both felt like we were meant to be together, and at the same time, we saw the end of our relationship coming. I couldn't stand the long hours of silence, so I started reading the guidebook from the back. There were photos of a massive mountain range and Mount Aconcagua, located in Argentina, near the border with Chile. It is the highest mountain in South America. I turned the page and saw a photo of the Christ the Redeemer statue on top of a mountain in the Andes, towering over the sprawling landscape. I wondered if Tom had made it there or if he had died without ever seeing it. I imagined Tom getting off the bus and admiring the picturesque mountain scenery. And as he turned, he noticed the giant shadow of the cross and looked up to see the figure of Christ with his hand raised in greeting. The sun hung behind the statue, silhouetted against the clear sky, and Tom squinted to take in the sight of the light. Tears filled my eyes. Emotions overwhelmed me, and I looked out the window. A vast ocean stretched out before me, with icebergs floating on its surface. The setting sun painted the endless sea of moving ice purple, a sight so mesmerizing that at times it seemed as if the whole world was engulfed in a red glow. The landscape was both beautiful and ominous. If all the cats in the world disappeared. 26 hours later, we were back in our little monopoly town. "Okay, see you tomorrow," she called over her shoulder as she got off at her stop and headed up the steep hill, as she always did. I watched her go, sadly watching her step by step as she walked away from me. A week later, we broke up. One 5-minute conversation, and it was over. Just like that. Like filling out a form to clarify a change of address or some other document. A few casual words, and that was it. Thousands of hours of phone conversations were in the past, and now it took only 5 minutes to realize that we were strangers. It was easy for us to communicate on the phone. But at the same time, we missed the chance to get to know each other better, to become truly close people. The phone took away the time we needed to develop real feelings and memories. And in the end, our feelings just evaporated. My phone bill, which arrived regularly every month, recorded over 20 hours of conversations totaling 12,000 yen. I don't remember us ever discussing whether it was worth it. I wonder how much I paid for one word. We could talk about anything on the phone, but it still didn't guarantee that we would truly understand each other. And when we left the Monopoly game we were playing in our small town and entered the real world, we discovered that the old rules of the game, the only thing that kept our relationship going in that particular place and time, no longer worked. At least our relationship lasted for a while by inertia. For some reason, we continued our game, following all the rules. But just a few days in Buenos Aires clearly showed us that those same rules had become meaningless. However, there was one small regret. The feeling that if we had taken our phones with us on that flight back to Japan, then maybe, just maybe, we would have been able to tell each other how we felt and we wouldn't have to break up. Monopoly was over, but maybe it was worth taking a chance and trying a new game. To gain something, you have to lose something. That's how I pictured it. We're on a plane, and God brings us our phones. So I call her, even though she's sitting next to me, and start a conversation. "Tell me, what's on your mind?" You first. I'm really sad. Me too. I was thinking about you. I was thinking about you too. What are you going to do? I don't know. What should we do? I just want to go home. Me too. What are we going to do after that? I don't know. Why don't we move in together? That might be a good idea. We can have coffee at home. And hot chocolate. If only we'd had our phones with us then. We could have talked on the phone the entire flight to Japan. It doesn't have to be anything specific, just casual chit-chat to let you know you're not alone. And listen to get inside the other person's head. If only. If all the cats in the world disappeared. I still remember the way she gave me a small smile when we said goodbye at the bus stop near her house. That smile was a small wound that opened somewhere in the back of my mind. It ached on rainy days, like an old football injury. But when you think about it, it's not that unusual. I mean, I probably have a legion of small injuries buried somewhere in the corners of my memory. I guess that's what some people call regret. So about today. The sound of her voice brought me back to reality. I noticed that we had approached the cinema building where she lived. Yeah? I'm sorry I told you so many unpleasant things. Oh, it's okay. It was helpful. But you haven't forgotten about our agreement, have you? Huh? As usual, I hesitated, trying to remember. Forgot? Well, strain your memory. We promised ourselves that if we ever broke up, we would openly admit what we didn't like about each other. Exactly. We had such an agreement. But it's sad to hear unflattering words addressed to us at the moment of parting. We secretly hoped that this would help us restore our relationship and give us a chance. Love is an eternal teacher. I am absolutely sure that I used exactly these words, without any irony. At the time, she said that she could not live without me. I felt the same way. So, I told you everything so that you would know about it before you die. She seemed to enjoy her words, she even laughed a little. Thank you for keeping your promise. Even if it's not exactly what I want to hear when I'm on the verge of death. And I laughed too. When our relationship was just starting, I couldn't even imagine that it would ever end. I reasoned like this, if I'm happy, then she must be happy too. But there came a time when everything changed. Feelings are not constant, they fade with time. Love can't last forever. That's all. And even though everyone knows this, people still fall in love. I think it's the same with life. We all know that one day it will come to an end, but we still act as if we're going to live forever. Like love, life is beautiful precisely because it's finite. You're going to die soon, right? She asked, opening the big, heavy doors of the cinema. You say that like you don't care. I just thought I'd throw you a special screening of your favorite movie, one last time, you know? Wow, thanks. Okay, then come here tomorrow at 9 o'clock. It'll be an after-hours screening. Bring a movie you like. Okay. But before you go, I still want to ask you one question. Not that. What's my favorite place? Oh, my God, what is that? I've forgotten it all. Okay, you don't remember, that's life. Then that'll be your homework. Come back tomorrow night with your answer. With that, she closed the massive doors of the theater behind her. See you tomorrow, she mouthed through the glass. Until tomorrow. I nodded back. The moment the lights of the cinema went out, the street was plunged into darkness. I stared blankly at the old brick building of the cinema, illuminated by the red and green lights of the sign. What a strange day. All the phones were gone, but what had I lost? I had trusted my memory and my relationships to the phone, and when it suddenly disappeared, I felt uneasy. More than that, I felt uncomfortable. I felt so lonely and helpless, standing there waiting under that clock tower, more helpless and lonely than I had expected. With the invention of mobile phones, many things in our lives have changed. It is not a problem to find a person at any hour, in any place. People have forgotten what it is to wait. But the feeling of impatience at not being able to contact her, the warm feeling of hope and the chills all over my body were still fresh in my memory. And then I remembered, undeniably. Here it is. This is her favorite place. The cinema. She often told me about it in those days. She felt that there would always be a secluded corner for her, a place reserved especially for her, in that cinema. The movie theater had been an invisible participant in many of our conversations. Now that I knew the right answer, I couldn't wait to tell her right away. My hand dove into my pocket for my phone. But of course, damn it, it wasn't there. There are no phones anymore. It was so annoying. No connection. I looked back at the movie theater and slowly walked towards it. I remembered the time when I was a student and was waiting for her call. Now I felt the same. I needed to share my thoughts with her. It's strange, it was at that moment when she was unavailable to me that I needed her the most. In the old days, before cell phones and email, people wrote letters. They imagined their letters reaching their loved ones and wondered how he or she would react to this message. And then they waited with anticipation for a reply, checking their mailbox every day. Gifts are like letters, too. It's not about the gift itself, but about what it might mean to the person you're giving it to, so when choosing a gift, you intuitively focus on his reaction, his facial expression, and how happy he'll be to receive exactly that. We all know that one day it will come to an end, but we still act as if we are going to live forever. To gain something, you have to lose something. My mother always said these words. I remember clearly the day when her sneezing suddenly stopped. She was stroking lettuce, curled up in her lap, and she said this phrase with such conviction. I was thinking about my girlfriend, looking at the movie theater sign, and suddenly I felt her words weighing on me. You're going to die soon, right? A sharp pain immediately pierced the right side of my head. My chest was squeezed, and it felt like I was suffocating. I felt so cold that I was shaking and my teeth were chattering. I think I'm going to die after all. No, I don't want to die. I couldn't control myself anymore and fell to my knees right in front of the movie theater. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I heard my own voice behind me. I don't want to die. I turned around, surprised. It was Aloha? Gotcha? Man, you should have seen the look on your face right now. In the sub-zero temperatures, Aloha was wearing his traditional Hawaiian shirt, shorts, and sunglasses pulled up to his forehead. But this time, instead of palm trees and American cars, his shirt featured dolphins and surfboards. What the F, maybe you should have worn something else. I was so pissed, but I couldn't let myself be mad at him. So, buddy, you were on a date. Yeah, I envy you. I've been watching you from the sidelines. Looks like you had a great day. Wait, you've been following us this whole time? Where have you been? I asked, feeling a cold sweat break out in me. Over there. Aloha pointed to the sky. I couldn't handle this guy. But anyway, seriously, you don't want to die yet? You're becoming more and more attached to life. Apparently so. Oh, there's no doubt about it, you don't want to die. It happens to everyone. I felt awkward, but I had to admit it. Or, to be honest, it wasn't that I didn't want to die, I just couldn't come to terms with the fear of facing death, the fear of the approaching end. Well, one way or another, it's time for the next step. I've decided what you'll give up this time. From what? From this. And Aloha pointed to the movie theater. If all the cats in the world disappeared. So how about this? We get rid of the movies in exchange for your life. From the movies? I whispered barely audibly, staring at the movie theater, which was starting to blur before my eyes. My memories flashed back to the movies with my girlfriend and the endless movies we watched. Different images float before my eyes, a crown, a horse, clowns, a spaceship, a top hat, a machine gun, the sight of a naked woman. Anything can happen in a movie, sad clowns laugh, spaceships dance, and horses talk. I must have been having a bad dream. Help! I screamed, but I could barely hear my own voice. And I immediately lost consciousness.